Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Rachel, and I'll be moderating today's webinar, Overcoming the Challenges of Multi-Channel Customer Care, hosted by 3CLogic and PIPL. First, I'd like to introduce our two guest speakers. Representing 3CLogic, we have Guillaume Steenhoff, VP of Marketing and Business Development. Guillaume has over 10 years of experience in sales and customer support, and he routinely shares best practices on how to marry technology with business processes to enhance the overall customer experience. And then representing PIPL, we have Garth Moulton, SVP of Business Development. Garth actually co-founded Jigsaw, which is a people search engine that was acquired by Salesforce, and is an expert on how companies can use data to grow their sales. Welcome, Garth and Guillaume. It's great to have you both here today.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
So in this webinar, we're going to review how to intelligently route customer inquiries from various channels, easy methods of obtaining a robust set of customer data, and then how to ensure your data stays up to date and is used in the most effective manner. So at this point, I'm going to pass the floor to Guillaume.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks, Garth, for joining today. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for everyone for joining us on this webinar and taking time out of your day to listen to what we have to say. So I want to start with a slide that I typically default to, only because it sort of hammers a very important point home, which is sort of the state of where multi-channel customer engagement currently stands. And the reality is, if as short as 5 years ago, it was sort of a nice to have to offer alternative channels to traditional telephony, for example, the reality is that now the vast majority, well over 3/4 of the average consumer, are natively using 3, if not more, channels to communicate with any single institution. That could be voice, it could be email, it could be text, chat, social media, video, self-service, and quite frankly, there may be additional channels currently under development that might only come to fruition in a couple of years' time and may very well change the dynamic again. But what's important here is that ultimately, consumers now are not natively using a single avenue by which to communicate with an organization. And so the onus is on the organization to be able to seamlessly be able to transition between those respective channels, still identify the individual regardless of the channel they've chosen, so you can in fact provide that level of customer service, customer experience, customer care that consumers natively expect given the advancements that we have in technology today. And the data really supports that. If you look at some of the research that's been done, the expectation is if the year is 2016, in less than 4 years' time, so 2020, the expectation for omni-channel customer experience will be amplified to the extent that consumers will expect almost near perfect execution. So as much as it's perhaps still under development, there's still some best practices being determined as it stands today. How can we utilize the data that we have, the channels that are available, and so forth, and what are the processes that will govern the most optimized customer experience? The reality is that from an organizational standpoint, there's a lot of pressure to get that done sooner rather than later. And we have only to look at sort of the channels and sort of the progression they've made across the board. So what you have here is a report from Forrester dating back to 2012 as well as 2014, I highly expect, and I'm looking forward to when they have the 2016 report come out. But I expect that the trends will be largely familiar and similar to what we have here. So you can see, for example, telephony or voice-based customer service is still one of the highest priorities or one of the highest channels that customers tend to default to when they have an inquiry. That being said, there are additional avenues that are increasingly becoming popular that we as organizations have to recognize and in that regard have to adopt. So for example, you look at voice self-service towards the middle. In 2012, it didn't exist. And in less than 2 years' time, more or close to half of the surveyed individuals in the U.S. Natively either requested or used that type of channel to address their inquiry. And you can see similar trends when it comes to use of mobile phone application, very similar to voice self-service, the use of SMS, which obviously has almost doubled, Twitter, social media channels, email, and so on and so forth. So what you're seeing here is not necessarily the degradation of the use of telephony, but perhaps the diversification of the channels that customers will natively use to address a whole slew of different inquiries. And so ultimately, companies with extremely strong omni-channel customer engagements, you would expect, are going to retain a higher percentage of their customers. So those that successfully implement this today have almost 90% on average retention rates, which are quite high. And when you consider that we're moving into this service-based industry, retention is a pretty important metric by which to gauge any enterprise or organization's success. And yet, if you look at the counterpoint, those institutions that do a very poor job of managing the different channels actually see only a 33% customer retention rate, which you would assume at that point probably means that they're not profitable or are certainly declining and facing some pretty tough challenges ahead. But of course, what we're finding is that despite the fact that the facts point to the extensive importance of all this, the majority of the businesses today are simply not delivering on these important items. In fact, if you actually look and query customers, you'll find that just over 10% will actually agree that companies are effectively leveraging different channels, whether it be digital, social media, or even traditional channels. You might consider email traditional, but certainly telephony, in an effective manner. So close to 90% of the population would argue that there's obviously plenty of room for improvement. But obviously that's going to beg the very obvious question, which is what's going wrong? And so I'll default here to you, Garth, and maybe allow you to weigh in a little bit.
Thanks, Guillaume. I think by and large, these have been problems for companies trying to serve their customers for years and years. So sort of 15 years ago when we started Jigsaw, it was just telephone numbers and email addresses, as well as kind of snail mail addresses that. And now there's multiple other channels that are even more active. So it's the problem. It's a data problem that's compounding as expectations of consumers increase. And I think what you're seeing across particularly generational lines are millennials are more open to having their various contact data out there, but they have a corresponding expectation from vendors and from people that they work with that I've given you access to this information, you should know it. It's not okay to say, oh, I don't recognize you if I come in using Facebook or Twitter or my mobile. It's not okay to just say, oh, well, all we have is a telephone number. And so the expectation is pushing, as Guillaume said, over to vendors to solve that data problem. And as you can see from the slide here, only 6% of businesses say that they have a single view of all customers, which is quite small. And the way to sort of attack that, as I said, it's a data problem, and there are a number of reasons to why that is, and I've listed them out here. And these are problems for customer data in lead generation and marketing, as well as customer support, customer interaction, customer account management. And many times the information across their system is fragmented, or which really essentially means incomplete. They've only got maybe you've got a name and you've got a telephone number, or you've got a name and you've got an email, and sometimes you've got both, but there's no join to those records. Many times the information that's contained in the marketing system or in a sales system is very different from the billing system and so it joins. But you still got that customer expectation as, don't you know who I am? I mean, I know myself as a customer, I always like to pick on the cable companies because I write that big check every month, but they don't even know who I am when I call, which is I know the data and I know the systems behind that, and I know that it's not that hard. But at any rate, you have stovepipes data. Also, the data can become stale. People don't change their Facebook and their Twitter so much, but their work emails and work telephone numbers change very, very frequently, and also as people, especially young people entering sort of into the business world, their numbers actually and their contact information does change. So it's very, very difficult to actually keep up with that information. And the data companies that are out there, it's funny, I've made reference to 13 years ago when we started Jigsaw was to really to go after the traditional data companies, all of which are still in business and still out there selling data. And it's not because they're evil people. It's a very, very difficult business problem to try to keep up with the incredible rate of change of contact details for people, and particularly with all these different channels. Social data, particularly LinkedIn and Facebook and Google is very good at keeping specific parts of information, but that doesn't tell the whole story. That doesn't have your sort of your physical addresses and your telephone numbers and everything else. ID resolution becomes very, very difficult, and it's also it's impossible to own all that data. From the sort of traditional data companies that want to go out and aggregate all this information and have a sort of big database in the sky. There's so many moving parts and so many moving channels, and so much data is coming in from all over. It really is quite impossible, particularly to actually monetize that. And if they can, it's extraordinarily expensive. And particularly for companies to try to go out and say, okay, I'm going to solve this single view of customer by going out and actually purchasing all the data that's out there. You couldn't even begin to tackle it. So there's a number of inherent challenges with kind of the data solutions that are out there. I would also be very suspect of anyone that comes in and says, okay, our data solution is going to provide you with an answer to this problem, because in reality you're going to have to work with the platform companies and the CRM companies like Sugar and the customer service and other software applications like 3CLogic, in conjunction with data companies that can try to tackle this problem.
Right. So to your point, though, Garth, that's really only part of the equation, right? So obviously, obviously step one is to be able to actually fill the gaps, or at least identify individuals across the different channels, different IDs that they might maintain within those channels. But then if you successfully do that, then the next step obviously is then what do you do with that information, right? So one of the other issues that we have natively found is that even if you have all the right information, the inquiries aren't always submitted to the right individual. And that tends to be an identification issue. So someone who has a support issue may all of a sudden go to the wrong team or department. In some cases, for all you know, they might end up in the billing department, and then the billing agent is obviously ill-suited to address that need. And that fundamentally goes back to what you're talking about, right? Which is, how can you, and the expectation, of course, is that I, as a consumer, when I'm dealing with an organization, that they should be able to recognize me, that there should be at least a semblance of a relationship that would facilitate, when I call in, email, chat, whatever the case may be, facilitate the routing of my inquiry to the appropriate representative. And yet, you can see here in front of you, close to, well, just over a quarter of the individuals will find that in most often cases, that's not what's happening. And then, really to compound the issue, there's obviously changes in trend, right? So what we've seen is that, today, over 40% of companies assign all their social media tasks to marketers, which is great. But the reality is that when I have a complaint, I tend to post it on social media, which means that it's being serviced by the wrong department. So as a marketer, I've done my job, I've done the promotional aspect of things, but then I haven't necessarily set up my organization to receive the incoming inquiries that obviously would have to be addressed by a different set of agents, different skill sets, notably perhaps customer service, customer support, perhaps even account representatives. And it's interesting because while it's 40% today, the expectation is that close to 90% of all customer service requests are going to be handled over social media by 2020. So again, just around the corner. So again, if you can't identify the individual, their Twitter feed, their LinkedIn account, their Facebook name, and so on and so forth, if you can't make that connection, then by default, you're probably going to lay the groundwork for a poor experience, and they're going to judge you for it accordingly. And then, of course, though, the other issue is how do you help facilitate the agents, right? So what we find is we tend to focus on the customer, and the customer takes it out on the agent. But are we actually providing the tools for that representative to successfully address the incoming inquiry? And more often than not, you find that in addition to being a data issue, it's also, even if you have the data isn't being properly shared across the entire organization. So marketing may have your Twitter feed, but customer support may have your telephone number, and the two aren't linked. And so, for that reason, if an inquiry is routed to the wrong agent, they're still not able to perhaps try and catch the issue and resolve it to the best of their abilities because they still can't connect the dots. And you can see that here, right? So close to half of agents are actually unable to be effective in customer resolutions because the actual infrastructure and the data management is not up to par. In fact, most consumers are more technologically advanced than the very institutions that are providing the service that they're seeking out. And then inevitably leads to consumers having to repeat their issue on a regular basis to different agents, basically a Groundhog's Day, if you will. And then, by default, consumers are not able to easily switch from one channel to the next because they can't count on that seamless transition to be available because, again, natively, we as an institution, as organizations, at least on average, aren't able to actually connect the dots and understand that the individual that initially connected with me on chat is the same person that just reached out to me via telephone. So I'm curious, knowing all that, and I think we're talking the same thing, the same language here, Garth, what's your thought process on how businesses can actually overcome some of these challenges, whether it's in the contact center space, or customer support, or all the above?
Well, Guillaume, I really think it does start with data. If you can get almost a key or a key linkage of the information, that's a good start. Then to be put into an actual working system and one that has a comprehensive view across all those areas of the company, which I think is really kind of the core message that we're trying to bring together, 3CLogic people, and also with Sugar CRM. It's using the systems that you currently use, but with someone like a PIPL actually providing you sort of a key or a map to not only connect the dots between the information that you already have, but to actually fill in and enhance information that you might not have. We use this example of Julie Belize, which is not, I don't think, a real person. This is sort of to protect the innocent, we've put together an example profile here. I think there might even be some of my own information in here as well. But what PIPL does is, quite simply, we're a 10-year-old company that got our basis as a search engine. So we've been searching for 10 years. We've not only been searching in all public records, and we have 10 years of relationships with all sorts of social networks and e-commerce companies and other channels, telephone channels, all over the world. But we've been creating algorithms that do clustering and for the attributes of all these basic attributes about a person. So we not only do business with sort of sales and marketing companies and software and customer relationship management and customer service, but we actually do work with the government for ID validation, and for many countries we have some of the premier information that's out there but at its core, what we're doing is we're clustering all this information and putting it together in a profile that gets created on the fly. So we don't provide data services. We don't provide software. We work with platforms that make use of our live data feeds, and that serves as sort of a map or sort of a key which I think is the first step to getting a single view of your customer. So here's the example sort of Julie, for example, from the last slide, if you as a company do not have, you don't have a mobile number, or you don't have that mobile number attached to one sort of profile for Julie, or you don't have her Facebook, or for example, it's the information has been stovepiped across systems because there's no key, there's no one common attribute to join it, that's where PIPL comes in. And then can give you this complete picture. So whether you're calling into wherever Julie, however she accesses customer support, or however you're communicating with Julie, you're going to be able to have the appropriate information and to be able to identify her. And then using a 3CLogic or Sugar CRM, the systems, they can help to perpetuate the data to where it needs to be. So really, PIPL provides the raw material, but the engine is really contained with Guillaume and with Sugar CRM. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how that works.
Yeah, no, I think you positioned it beautifully, Garth, is that ultimately at the end of the day, step one is being able to understand who in fact are you trying to service. And the reality is today, we've really moved away from outbound or if you will, proactive calling of agents or customers, and really defaulted to allowing the customer to dictate the terms and conditions, and most importantly, when they want to interact with your organization or any organization for that matter. So the challenge here, and what makes data so key in this instance, is if that's the case, then there's really no way to anticipate when that interaction may actually be initiated by the customer. And yet it's still your responsibility to be able to connect the dots and be ready when that engagement were to occur. And so we're certainly talking a lot about customer experience, about customer service, customer support, natively to some extent contact centers, which are really becoming the front line that are fielding these ongoing inquiries. And then the onus and the responsibility is on the organization to be properly organized to host those inquiries effectively as they occur in real time, right? So when someone were to call in, instead of being, can you give me your social security number, or I can't track you down, or you're not popping up, have data that is accurate enough that you can automatically populate that customer's information using, for example, a Sugar CRM platform natively to the agent, because the information has already been made available, and then the system like 3CLogic has been able to connect the dots, route that call, chat, email, whatever the case may be, to the appropriate individual best suited to address that need. And now you're really playing with fire and really providing that level of customer service, customer care that you would expect. And it's important, right? So 77% of strong omni-channel companies today store data across different channels, and that's compared to less than half that are, to this day, currently weak in providing omni-channel within their native customer offering. So you can tell that for those that do this well, sharing data across channels and making it readily available, not just at an individual department level, but across departments, is extremely important. But you have to natively be able to integrate the platforms that are then going to field the calls, so a call center application like 3CLogic, and then also the data management system that you're utilizing to host and store that information, and that which ultimately a platform like PIPL would populate all the missing gaps. And now you have a complete view of the customer, which then facilitates the ability to actually host an intelligent discussion, and for that matter, intelligently route any and all communications within the call center, within your contact center, support center, help desk, however you define that customer-facing department, in a manner that would be in line with what we today as consumers, if we sort of take off our 3CLogic and PIPL hats and just pretend to be customers here for a second, the type of customer experience that we ourselves natively would expect outside of the office. And so that's natively what we do here at 3CLogic. We are a call center and CTI software and communication platform that, for all intents and purposes, helps to leverage information, data for that matter, hosted in, for example, a system of record or a CRM like Sugar CRM, to dynamically route your calls, provide integrated data between what takes place on the call and your CRM, as well as skill-based routing, call recordings, basically all the features, functionalities that as an agent your representatives would require to be able to properly field the call. But obviously, this is all very much contingent on being able to natively identify the person out of the gate, which is obviously contingent on having the data, that key, to Gar's point, that allows you to connect those dots and identify the individual so you can, in fact, make use of a Sugar CRM and a 3CLogic to then handle the customer engagement itself.
Thanks, Guillaume. And PIPL is, I think I've made the point before, but it's a people search engine, an ID resolution platform, which other software platforms and other companies access via API our data. So we're really sort of a raw materials or a factory for data. One of my favorite question and answer responses when I talk to potential partners is when they ask, for example, how many business people in the U.S. do you have access to? And my answer is all of them, because there are literally millions of sources on the web, public resources, and then data relationships that we have access to. But we are not sort of a big database in the sky. And another point that I want to make is that we are, it's mostly public data. It's very centered. It's not Social Security information and things like that. So we don't get crossways with data privacy. It's used. We're on the up and up, so to speak, and we are working with larger and larger companies that are making use of our extraordinarily comprehensive data.
But to your point, Garth, obviously when it comes to data, very few individuals are expecting you to identify them by their Social Security number, right? That's in and of itself the challenge, as well as the opportunity to work with a platform like PIPL integrated, for example, with Sugar, is that most people expect you to identify them by the more common IDs, natively social media and the likes, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's the linkage of those pieces of data, which are very core to the individual, but aren't necessarily easy to link for organizations. Another point I'd like to make, and I think that you've made it, but I'd like to highlight it, is right now, I think depending on what industry you're in, this would be a competitive differentiator. If you were to get further along the spectrum of having a single view of your customer, but very, very soon it's going to be a cost of doing business.
Agreed. Rachel?
Thank you, Guillaume and Garth, for that informative presentation, and thank you to our audience for joining us today. If you would like to learn more about either 3CLogic or PIPL, we encourage you to visit their websites or contact them directly using the provided information. Thanks again.